There is a briefing room somewhere in the United States of America that you will never be allowed inside. Not because of your clearance level, not because of where you were born, or what you believe, or who you voted for. You will never be allowed inside because the people who run that room decided a very long time ago that what they keep in there is simply too consequential for the rest of us to know. In our last video, we traced the impossible chain of command, 12 presidents, 12 men who stood at the absolute apex of American power, men who commanded nuclear arsenals, who deployed armies, who could, with a single phone call, reshape the geography of the modern world. And yet, when it came to the most significant discovery in the history of our species, they were kept in the dark, or handed a carefully curated version of a truth that someone else controlled. Eisenhower, Kennedy, Carter, Clinton. Temporary, every single one of them. 4 years, 8 years, then gone. New faces, new hands on the wheel, new men who get the briefing. The version of the briefing they're allowed to receive, and then move on. But the secret? The secret doesn't retire. The secret is permanent. And the permanence requires an infrastructure, a system, a set of hands that never changes, not with elections, not with administrations, not with the tides of public opinion. So if the highest office in the land doesn't control the greatest discovery in human history, who does? On January 17, 1961, 3 days before he handed power to John F. Kennedy, Dwight D. Eisenhower went on national television and said something that nobody fully understood at the time. In his farewell address, his last act as a president, he didn't talk about peace treaties or national pride or the promise of America. He issued a warning. He warned about what he called the military-industrial complex.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
He warned that his alliance, left unchecked, could acquire influence that was, and I'm going to use his exact word here, unwarranted. We heard that speech and we nodded along. We thought we understood what he meant. Tanks, bombers, missile silos, defense contracts, the usually machinery of war. But what if Eisenhower wasn't talking about tanks at all? What if he was talking about something that had been recovered from a field in New Mexico 14 years earlier, and what had since been done with it? Before we get to the names, before we get to the specific corporations, the specific programs, the specific people, you need to understand the legal architecture of the cover-up, because the way this was built is almost elegant in its ruthlessness. The United States government has a fundamental vulnerability when it comes to keeping long-term secrets. It's called the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, passed in 1966. The law that gives any citizen the right to request records from federal agencies. Now, FOIA has limits. There are exemptions for classified material, for national security, and for ongoing investigations. Governments can and do use those exemptions aggressively. But here's the problem with keeping a physical secret inside the government forever. Things leak, administrations change, career bureaucrats retire, papers get misfiled, hard drives get copied, someone, somewhere, eventually talks. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet archives got partially opened, the Pentagon Papers made it into the New York Times. Even the most ironclad institutional secrets have a half-life. So, how do you hide a non-human craft for 70 plus years? Obviously, we cannot leave it in a government facility. Okay, so what do we do? Well, you have to transfer it legally, officially, with paperwork and signatures, and it's probably good to get the full blessing of the chain of command. We need to move it from a government facility, which is subject to congressional oversight, FOIA requests, investigations, to a defense contractor facility, which these rules do not apply. And once it's there, it's gone, legally invisible. Private companies are not subject to FOIA. They don't have to answer to the public. They don't have to publish their research. They don't have to respond to congressional subpoenas the same way a government agency does. They answer to their shareholders and their board of directors, and that's it. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is how corporate law works. This is the system working exactly as designed, just pointed in a direction that nobody voted for. In the summer of 2023, a man named David Grush sat in front of the United States Congress and said something that should have stopped the world, but it didn't. Grush was not a conspiracy theorist. He was a decorated Air Force officer and intelligence official, a graduate of the Air Force Academy, and a veteran of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office. He served as a representative on the UAP task force, and under oath, with the full understanding that lying to Congress is a federal crime. He testified that the United States government has, for decades, been operating a program to retrieve non-human craft and biological materials. But here's the part that people glossed over in the headlines. He testified that these materials had been deliberately transferred into Spatial Access Programs, or better known SAPs, hidden inside private defense contractors, not stored in government vaults, not held at military installations, inside private companies. He said the movement was deliberate. It was a structural decision made by people who understood exactly what they were doing. They weren't moving the materials outside the reach of oversight. They were moving the material outside the reach of the oversight mechanisms that exist for exactly this kind of program. The government doesn't own the scrap, the corporations do. The story starts earlier than most people realize. Not in the 1970s, not with Ronald Reagan's mysterious comments about alien threats to world leaders. It starts in the 1950s, in a non-profit research organizations headquartered in Columbus, Ohio, the Battelle Memorial Institute. Battelle sounds like exactly the kind of institution that's designed to never appear in a sentence like this one. It's a non-profit. It does research. It works with governments and corporations on scientific and technical problems. It's been doing so since the 1929. But there's a thread running through the UFO research community that keeps pulling investigators back to Battelle, and specifically to their relationship with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Wright-Patterson is significant. It's been significant since the late 1940s. It was the home of Project Sign, the original government UFO investigation, and later Project Blue Book, which ran from 1952 until 1969. Blue Book's official purpose was to investigate UFO sightings and determine if they represented a threat to national security. In unofficial purpose, if you believe the researchers, the insiders, and the pattern of its own documentation, was to provide plausible explanations for sightings that the government couldn't afford to have taken seriously by the public. Weather balloons, swamp gas, mass hysteria, temperature inversions. Blue Book was the magician's left hand, the distraction, and while the public watched the distraction, Battelle was allegedly doing the real work. The specific claim that keeps surfacing involves something researchers call memory metal, material allegedly recovered from crash sites. And here we are specifically talking about the Roswell debris field that exhibited properties that had no business existing in 1947 or in 1957 or arguably even today. Witnesses who handled the material described metal that you could crumple in your fist, crush it into a ball, and then watch it slowly, silently, seamlessly return to its original shape. No heat, no mechanical process, just return. Researchers who have spent years cross-referencing the Battelle documentation with the known timeline of shape memory alloy development believe that correlation is not a coincidence. They believe Battelle was handed something in the 1947, something from Wright-Patterson, and was tasked with figuring out what it was and how to replicate it. Once you have something, once you have material that defies conventional science, you need somewhere to study it, somewhere to test it, somewhere that doesn't officially exist. And that somewhere, it's EG&G. If you've never heard of EG&G, that's by design. The company was founded in 1947. Notice the year, by 3 MIT scientists. The name is their initials. EG&G was the kind of company that the government calls when it needs something done quietly, competently, and with a full understanding that it will never appear in a press release. They managed nuclear weapons tests at the Nevada test site. They developed high-speed photography systems. They were deeply integrated into the classified defense infrastructure in ways that are still not fully public. And for decades, for a period spanning from the 1950s well into the 1990s, EG&G was the primary contractor for operations at what is officially known as the Nevada National Security Site and the surrounding classified facilities, including the installation at Groom Lake, including what some insiders referred to S4, a facility allegedly located at Papoose Lake, approximately 10 miles south of the main Groom Lake installation. The name Bob Lazar will be familiar to anyone who has spent more than 20 minutes in this particular rabbit hole. In 1989, Lazar went public with a claim that still divides the research community today, that he had worked at S4 in a program specifically focused on understanding and replicating the propulsion systems of recovered non-human craft. You can believe Bob Lazar or you can disbelieve him. That's a separate conversation, and it's a long one. But what investigators have noted, and what is harder to dismiss, is the structure of the operation he described, the compartmentalization, the need-to-know architecture that was built around whatever was happening at S4. He described a workplace where you arrived via chartered aircraft, a Janet flight, on a plane that didn't appear on airline manifests, and worked in a building where you were escorted at all times. where you didn't know what the person in the room next to yours was doing, where the classified nature of the program wasn't just enforced by policy, it was enforced by physical architecture. You couldn't accidentally see something you weren't cleared for, because the building wouldn't let you. That structure, that extreme, almost paranoid compartmentalization, it's exactly what you would expect if you were running a program that you needed to keep not just from the public, but from the rest of the government. EG&G understood that assignment. And then there's Lockheed Martin, or more specifically, the Advanced Development Programs Division of Lockheed Martin. The division that operates out of a facility in Palmadale, California. This facility operates under a name that has become almost mythological in the history of American aerospace, the Skunk Works. The Skunk Works was founded in 1943 by a brilliant, difficult, visionary engineer named Kelly Johnson. Its mandate, from the beginning, was to build aircraft that were theoretically impossible. Aircraft that pushed so far beyond the accepted boundaries of aerodynamics that conventional development programs couldn't produce them, because conventional development programs moved too slowly, involved too many people, and generated too much documentation. The Skunk Works model was deliberate isolation, a small team, extreme secrecy, minimal bureaucracy, direct access to decision makers, the freedom to fail fast and iterate faster. The aircraft that came out of Skunk Works redefined what humans understood about flight. The U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, a jet that could cruise at Mach 3.2 and fly at 85,000 feet, an aircraft so advanced that it remained unbeatable from the day it was introduced. These weren't incremental improvements. These were generational leaps. Aircraft that arrived seemingly from nowhere, operating on principles that the public research community hadn't gotten to yet. Which raises a question that the UFO research community has been sitting with for a long time. Where did the inspiration come from? In the late 2000s, the Defense Intelligence Agency was running a program called OSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapon Systems Application Program. This program, which was funded by a $22 million congressional appropriation secured by then Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, was tasked with investigating the full spectrum of the UAP phenomena: craft performance, propulsion, materials science, psychological effects on witnesses, the whole picture. Investigative journalist George Knapp, who has spent 35 years covering this subject with more rigor than almost anyone in the media, has reported on what happened when OSAP investigators tried to get access to the UAP-related debris and materials for study. They didn't go to the Pentagon. They couldn't. They went to Lockheed Martin, and they had to negotiate. The Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, an agency operating with full congressional authorization and funding, had to sit across the table from a private corporation and negotiate for access to material that American taxpayers may have very well paid for. Lockheed Martin didn't have to say yes. They were under no obligation to cooperate with a government program just because the government asked. Lockheed Martin had the material, they had the leverage. And the DIA, well, the DIA had to ask nicely. Unfortunately, this negotiation reportedly did not go so well. Former Senator Harry Reid spoke publicly about his frustration with what he described as the stonewalling of private contractors when it came to congressional oversight. He specifically named aerospace companies as entities that were, in his view, operating programs that Congress should have visibility into, and actively preventing that visibility. Lockheed Martin's annual revenue exceeds $60 billion. They employ roughly 120,000 people globally. Their contracts with the US government span everything from fighter jets to satellite systems to missile defense infrastructure and cybersecurity. They are, in every practical sense, an essential organ of the American national security apparatus. The government cannot function in its current form without Lockheed Martin, which means that the government cannot meaningfully threaten Lockheed Martin. So let's take a look of where we are. What started in a New Mexico field in the summer of 1947? Whatever it was that came down, whatever they recovered from that debris field, has traveled a very specific path over the last 70 plus years. From the field to Wright-Patterson, from Wright-Patterson to Battelle, through compartmented programs housed inside private contractors, through the hands of men who have taken oaths of secrecy so layered that simply acknowledging the program exists could constitute a federal crime. And it has arrived, apparently, in the vaults and secure facilities of the largest defense corporation on the planet, safe from FOIA, safe from congressional subpoenas, safe from the oversight mechanisms that a democracy theoretically uses to prevent exactly this kind of unchecked accumulation of power. But here's the question I want to leave you with tonight, because I don't think it's the question most people ask when they think about UFO disclosure. Most people ask, is it real? Some people ask, why are they hiding it? But I think the most important question, the one with the most profound implications for the world you actually live in, is this. What happens next? Not next in terms of disclosure, not next in terms of congressional hearings. What happens next if a private corporation, one with no democratic accountability, successfully reverse engineers a machine that can bend space-time? We talk about UFO disclosure as though it's a single event, a moment, a press conference, a president standing at a podium confirming what many people have already suspected. But what if disclosure it's the last thing the people holding this secret want to happen? Not because the public can't handle the truth about non-human intelligence, but because full disclosure would require revealing how the technology has been managed, who controlled access to it, what decisions were made without the knowledge of the governments. Full disclosure isn't just a scientific revelation. Full disclosure is a corporate scandal, and the people at the center of that scandal have had 70 years to prepare for it. Eisenhower tried to warn us. He'd spent 8 years watching the machinery assemble itself, 8 years watching the contracts get signed and the compartments get built and the budgets disappear into classification levels that didn't officially exist. And on his way out the door, 3 days before handing the most powerful office in the world to his successor, he stood in front of the American people and tried to tell us something without being able to say it directly. We thought he was worried about defense spending. He was worried about what happens when the people guarding the most important secret in human history are no longer accountable to the humans they are supposed to serve. And somewhere in a facility that doesn't appear on any map you've ever seen, behind security fencing that your tax dollars may have helped pay for it, inside a program that your elected representatives are not permitted to ask about, the greatest secret in human history is sitting in a room, waiting.